My name is David Parker, and through my whole life, I've had spirit encounters, encounters with beings, UFOs, and I'm finally getting around to recording some of my stories. This one is about something that happened when I was a child, back in the late 1950s into the early 1960s. I lived on my grandmother's farm in southern Ohio on a dirt gravel road. We had no indoor plumbing, pretty isolated. On either side of us were cornfields. Across the dirt road was pasture for dairy cows. Next door neighbors, their farm is a dairy farm, so we let them use our pasture. So very often, probably once a week, every other week, this occurrence would happen the same time, every single time, exactly the same. And for some reason, my grandmother usually knew when it was going to happen. And usually in the afternoons, and sometimes it would happen at night, I would hear it. Grandmother would just say, get out on the porch. They're coming. Let's get ready. And she'd get her hair done and put her teeth in and put some rouge on, some lipstick on. She goes, hurry, hurry. They're coming. They're coming. And so on our front porch, we had a swing. And I would get in there, and pretty soon she'd come and say, they'll be here soon. They'll be here soon. And we were kind of in a little valley between two hills. There was a farmhouse, and then farther down the hill from us was a little creek, and then up the hill, I bet was our barn. Pretty soon you would hear people walking, kicking up the gravel down the road. And then you can start hearing the mumble of somebody talking and like that. And you hear different voices and talking back and forth. And it was very clear, but for some reason you couldn't make out the words. And then pretty soon here would come probably a total of maybe 30 Civil War soldiers, absolutely solid in blue. They were Union soldiers. They would come in groups. There'd be, maybe 2 or 3 in one group and, 4 or 5 in another group. Their outfits were torn up. It looked like there was some bullet holes in them. They were dirty. Their shoes were torn up. Some had guns. Most of them didn't. And they were all young guys. They looked like boys, teenage boys, maybe into their early 20s, but most of them looked like boys. And they were dirty, and the outfits were dirty and stained, and they would talk back and forth and just walk. And as they'd walk, you could just hear them, crunching on the gravel road, sometimes kicking up a rock. And they'd pass by, and then, 2 or 3 more would pass by, and then another little group. Some were by themselves. Always the last one, it was a straggler. He was always by himself. And they would pass by our farmhouse and then go down and go over the little bridge over the creek. And then, they disappear behind the barn and then reappear and then go up over the hill and be out of sight. And my grandmother would say, okay, well, let's go in and watch TV or have supper or whatever. And this went on time and time again. And I was just so used to it. So several times when they would come by, I would run up to the road. I thought, these are like young kids. And I'm out there in the middle of nowhere by myself. I wanted a playmate. So I talked to them, hey, you guys want to stop and, watch TV or do something? And they never responded to me. They never looked at me. And every step they took, it was exactly the same. It was the same group of boys, the same stragglers, the same mumbling that they said. And it was very clear mumbling, but for some reason, I couldn't make out the words. Totally solid. And I could see like where some of the fabric was torn and kind of fallen down. And other places it did look like bullet holes or just scruffy, torn uniforms. And several times at night when we'd have the windows open, the screens in the window in the summer when it was hot, I'd hear them. I start to hear, somebody coming down the road and the rocks crunching and kicking the rocks. And then I would hear They're mumbling. I could hear the talking, and here they were doing it again, exactly the same, again and again and again, for over the years, over several years that I lived out there. I saw it at least 50 times, and then heard it more at night. And almost always my grandmother knew during the daytime. It was a big deal for us to be on the porch and watch them go by, and then, you know, we go back and we didn't talk about it. I always wondered what happened. Um, and why were they walking by our farmhouse? So years later, decades later, I was watching a documentary on the Civil War, and it said that after the Civil War, because horses were killed and boats were blown up and the railroads were destroyed, that there was no way to get the soldiers home. So many of them had to walk home. And some of them had to walk like 1,000 miles to get back up north if they had been down like in Georgia. And so many of the soldiers that had survived the war never survived the long walk home. And I've always wondered if these boys had made it through the war and were trying to get home and never got home. I can still see their faces. I could, if I could draw. I could draw some of their faces. Young boys, young, and and going somewhere again and again and again, going somewhere, but not getting there. I feel such a kinship with them, being close to their age. I was, 10 years or more younger than them. But I haven't been back to the farm since the 1960s, and I always wondered, if I went back, would they still be trying to find their way home? And I wonder now if there's any way I could help them finally get to where it is that they really want to go. And I feel sad. It's my experience.